Hey friends, and welcome to the Wine CEO podcast. Today on the show, we are talking about a very interesting topic, a question that I get asked about all the time, and that is the flavor of smoke in wine. There's this perception with many consumers that if your wine tastes like smoke, it's a bad thing, that maybe the grapes have been tainted by wildfires in certain regions. This could not be more far from the truth, and I'm excited today to tell you a little bit more about this common misconception. Okay, so let's just dive in and talk about this concept of smoke taint in wine, because it definitely is an interesting topic and one that's good to know about as a consumer. So in episode number 111 of the Wine CEO podcast, I interviewed Dr. Anita Oberholster. And Dr. Anita is a PhD scientist from UC Davis, and she studied enology and a lot of different aspects of grape growing and winemaking for many, many years. What she shared in that episode is that you will be hard-pressed to find a wine on the market that has been impacted by smoke taint where you can actually smell and taste the impact of the smoke. If you were to taste a wine that's been tainted by smoke, it'll literally taste like you're licking an ashtray or smoking a cigarette. It has this really noticeable and pretty off-putting flavor to it and aroma. It's just a very noticeable characteristic. So there's no way that you would maybe be tasting a wine that has had smoke taint and not know it, or be kind of thinking that it's been tainted by smoke but unsure. You will know. And there's a lot of research that's been done around this. Trust me, you will know if you're tasting a wine that's been tainted by smoke. In those possibilities where grapes could be impacted by wildfires, the grape growers will actually harvest the grapes and they'll have them tested. So someone like Dr. Anita would come out, they would test the grapes, they would test the vineyard, and they would look at if there are actually polyphenols that have leached into the fruit and the vineyard to see if that could impact the final wine. Now, in that possibility, winemakers really have two options. On one hand, they could add activated charcoal as a way to pull out those phenols to remove that smoke taint so that then they could go ahead and sell that wine. Now, in that scenario, they're going to sell it at a much lower price. They're going to recognize they've had to manipulate the wine pretty significantly, and it's very, very possible that those wines could still have lesser quality flavors because the activated charcoal will actually pull out a lot of the wine flavor as well. So it's kind of a toss-up. What most winemakers will do is actually the second option. They will just discard those grapes altogether or use them for compost or other processes, but they're not going to make wine out of it, because at the end of the day, the winemaker doesn't want to put a bad product out on the market, right? That is going to impact their brand, that's going to impact their name. And so if it's going to taste awful, if it's going to taste like cigarettes and licking a wet ashtray, they're not going to do it, right? So what Dr. Anita said is that 99% of the time you will be very hard pressed to find a wine that has been affected by smoke taint out on the market. Now, what does that mean when you're tasting a wine and it tastes and smells like oak? If it's not from smoke taint, from a wildfire, much to maybe the misconception of a lot of news publications and consumers out there, what is it tasting like then? Why does the wine have these notes of maybe like toasted vanilla, toasted oak, and smoke? So that actually comes from a process of how the wine barrel is made and how the wine is aged in a wine barrel. So if you head back to episode number 108, I talked a lot about the oak that's used for making wine, the process of barrels, wood chips, and a lot of other things behind the wood that's used in winemaking processes. Part of the process of how a wine barrel is actually made is that the cooper, the person who makes the wood barrel, will actually toast the inside of the barrel. Now, in the same way that you can ask for your coffee beans to be lightly roasted, medium roasted, or dark roasted, a winemaker can ask a cooper to toast their oak barrel to a preferred level in order to get the exact flavors they're looking for in their wine. Pretty cool. So a winemaker might be looking for a really heavy, full forward bodied wine that has great notes of fruit, really strong tannins, and maybe they want to add those really toasty, smoky oak kind of flavors because they feel like that's going to round out the flavor that they're looking for. Maybe they feel like over time as that wine ages, those notes are going to soften, but it's going to bring out a really well-rounded and complex flavor to the wine. So those notes are actually really desirable, and the winemaker is intentionally choosing to have the wine taste that way. So any wine that has been aged in an oak barrel will likely have the possibility of a little bit of those oaky characteristics. So these are going to be a lot of red wines that you might see, as well as some select white wines as well. So if you are smelling or tasting these kind of oaky, toasty, vanilla kind of characteristics, don't think that that's a negative thing. It's a positive thing that's intended to be there by the winemaker. Now, do those smoky oak characteristics mean that the wine is a better wine than others? Definitely not. The smoke and the oak characteristic is the preference of the winemaker who's making that particular wine, but it could be that for your palate and your personal preference, you don't care for those flavor notes, and that's okay. Maybe you prefer more crisp, clean, refreshing wines. That is your personal palate. As I've talked about on the show many times, there's no right or wrong in wine. It is your personal palate to enjoy as you prefer. So there are going to be some wines that a winemaker has chosen to have taste like oak, and there could be a wine rater or sommelier that will say that that's an excellent tasting wine, but for you and your palate, you may not care for that, and that is completely okay. Now, another question that folks often ask me is, are smoky wines or oaky wines better at aging? You know, kind of similar to maybe whiskey or scotch. Folks are thinking of things that are, really heavy in smoke and oak, and are those things able to be aged a little bit better? Not necessarily. So there are definitely some wines that have been impacted with smoke characteristics that are not intended to be aged. And if you want to learn a little bit more about aging, I'll also link my podcast episode that's all about aging wine and the right wines for aging. But at the end of the day, wines that age really well have high tannin structure, high acid, they have a little more complexity to them, and so they're going to be able to age a little bit longer. It has nothing to do with whether or not the wine has smoke characteristics, oaky flavors at all. That is just a completely different characteristic altogether. So I hope this was an interesting episode for you. I hope you learned a little bit more about the flavors of smoke in wine, the misconceptions around smoke taint, and really the truth around why you might taste smoke in your wine, and that actually can be a really positive characteristic if it's something that you enjoy in your palate. If you learned something new today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I would love for you to drop in the comments below your thoughts around smoke flavors in wine, as well as any questions you might have about this episode or any other wine topic as well. Don't forget, if you ever have a question about wine or a topic you want to hear more about, send me an email, Sarah@TheWineCEO, or you can drop me a DM on Instagram @TheWineCEO, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions or do an episode on your topic. That's all for this week, friends. I hope you drink something new and delicious, and I will catch you all in the next episode of The Wine CEO.